But yeah, thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday morning and dedicating your time. We are here today to learn about how to improve CSAT and NPS with AI. And this webinar is all about us sharing with you what we have learned over 5 years in the customer experience game. So understanding quant drivers. The big problem for customer experience people is CEOs and boards care about numbers and how you're moving them numbers, but we as CX people know that the levers to improve those numbers are all qual. It's all words. So some of the things you might be looking to move for your board could be NPS, CSAT, churn rate, retention rate. There are others there as well, like custom KPIs or customer effort score. But all these are made up of words and they're very hard to quantify. So there's a couple of examples here we have from our clients, like this head of customer insight, like how do we actually improve our tenant satisfaction score? Or our CEO has set a target to keep complaints flat this year. They were predicted to rise 7%. And that's what we're going to do today. I'll just do the introductions to our webinar legends here. So there's myself, Scott. I'll be in the background. I'm head of marketing here at Wordnerds. We've got Pete Dakin, our fearless CEO, and Steph Klisch from head of product. And the three things we'll be going through today is what kind of setup and data architecture do you need to leverage AI and use AI well? What makes a good insight and what the best in the business are doing to measuring those insights and the quality of those. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end, but please feel free to drop any questions at all during the discussions and the presentation, and we'll try and get to them there and then or at the end. And yeah, our experience today comes from a wealth of different clients. As you can see there, we've worked with big retailers like Sainsbury's, B&Q, M&S, transport services like Network Rail, TransPennine, Transport for Wales, as well as a host of others in there as well. So I promise you'll get some golden nuggets out today, or I'll eat my hat. And yeah, I'll pass across to Pete, who is going to go through the theory of these pieces, and then Steph will bring those to life with examples from customers of ours.
Thanks very much, Scott, and thank you for dangling the carrot that if I don't teach anybody anything, I will force you to eat a hat. That's very tempting, but I think we'll go with the learning stuff. So welcome, everybody. As Scott says, there's a couple of parts to this, really. The first is about information architecture and how you set up your system optimally so that you can be sure that you're listening to the right voices and looking at the right parts of the customer conversation. And then the second thing is much more detailed about actually how you go through this process that Scott described of finding out what customers are talking about in a way that lets you action the things that you need to action to move the number on those top level numbers like CSAT or NPS or customer effort score or whatever it is that you are being measured on. So we tend to find that when we first start dealing with people, often they're at a relatively early stage of voice of customer. Voice of customer is an emerging discipline, and it's definitely a spectrum. Different people are at different stages of it, and that's fine. And don't worry, whatever stage you're at, it's a journey for everybody. I don't think we work with some pretty advanced voice of customer teams, and I wouldn't say anybody thinks they've completely nailed it. But sometimes we see some things that we see in kind of early voice of customer setups is a fragmented voice of customer program, so different customer voices everywhere, the use of what we call afterthought analytics, and a lot of manual analysis. It is 2024, AI is now mainstream, and you'll be surprised the number of customer experience professionals that spend huge chunks of their time manually going through data. So what do we mean? What characterizes early voice of customer? So you tend to have an insights or a data team at the heart of this, and the scores that they are measured on, which we've mentioned. When somebody says, right, let's improve NPS, how do we get CSAT up? Or indeed, what does our data tell us about X? The first thing they do is they go to where the data is. And in most organizations, most of the time, that data is owned by and held by frontline team members in particular areas. So The social team owns the social data, or the marketing team owns the social data. You've usually got some kind of customer experience team that runs some surveys, and they might use a platform like Qualtrics or Medallia to do that. Social team might use something like Sprout or Brandwatch. You'll have a complaints team that deals with something like Zendesk or iCasework. And often you find that customer voice is therefore kind of disparate, and it's spread around the organization. It's held in silo. And all of these different platforms use different methodologies to look at it. The one thing that they have in common is that they were all designed to do something useful for front-end people. So often things like Qualtrics and Medallia are brilliant tools for triggering surveys. If somebody buys from your e-commerce store, what was their experience like? Something transactional, something brandy, whatever it is. Brandwatch is an amazing tool for managing your different social channels in real time. But actually, none of them were built for the express purpose of analyzing the text that this stuff pulls out. And the afterthought analytics that they give you when it comes to looking at text data is fairly rudimentary. Not only that, if you're an insights person looking at data spread across 2 or 3 of these different platforms, they're all using very different methodologies, and the sentiment analysis on one doesn't equate to the sentiment analysis on another. Some people have particular classification models, some people don't, and you're not comparing apples with apples. So the result is, as an insights person, you spend lots of your time manually going through this data. You look at the numbers that it gives you in the analysis to see where there's a problem, and then you read the verbatims to find out what's causing that problem. You do your best to find some kind of statistical significance in some of that based on effectively what you think, and you put that into a PowerPoint and you send it off to your frontline teams, and that's your report. If you're doing that, don't worry, most people are. That's not a problem, but it's not optimally set up. What does an optimal setup look like? Well, firstly, all of the different voices from across the organization, or as many of those customer touch points as possible, are taken into consideration. And all of that information, all of the text from that, the verbatims from that, alongside any metadata that you've got, any sales information, any segmentation information, is all pushed into a central data repository, some kind of data lake. And from there, that allows you as an insights person to use a specialist tool to do the analysis of that data. We've selected Wordnerds as the specialist tool. I don't know why. We could have picked any, but we chose that one. Call me old-fashioned. So you use something like Wordnerds to then basically go through that data and rank those insights, tell you about those insights, and we'll come to what it can do to the insights. And that requires an insights person to set that up. It requires an insights person to work on that. Again, this is an active pursuit. This is not a passive thing that you set and forget. We'll come to reasons why in a moment. But a team sort of dealing with this in real time listens for the stuff you care about, sends it back to the data lake as enriched data. And increasingly, this is being pushed out in organizations to BI tools. There are hundreds sometimes of software platforms in an organization. The last thing people want usually is another SaaS platform to log into. So pushing that data where people are already looking at their metrics, where the metrics dashboard exists, is great. And that allows people on the front line to self-serve. It allows people, when they have a question about the customer data, to go somewhere where they know that they can get that information back and look at that data and make their own conclusions based on the information that they bring to the table. Does that solve the problem entirely and obviate the need for an insights person to do reports? No, it doesn't. It never does. The frontline teams always have specific things that you aren't listening for. There will always be the need for people to go direct to the insights team to ask them more deeper questions. And that's kind of fine. But what it does do is it takes away the heavy lifting. That stuff you have to report every week, month, or quarter gets done and is there for people to see as soon as it's done. The rest of the stuff, and it saves your time as an insights person to do more high value stuff. The system does the heavy lifting, and you can then go wrangle the data for more specific questions. So that's kind of the theory, and it's worth just sort of bringing all of that out up front. This is what you're aiming at. You're aiming for this federated ecosystem of specialist tools where different people in the organization are managing their customer conversations in tools that they're happy with. That's away from the insights team. But actually, as an insights team, you're pulling all of that in using a standard methodology and then quarterbacking it out to the extremities of the organization where people closest to the data can make the decisions on how best to interpret it. And Steph, I think you can give us some examples of how we're seeing this worked in the real world.
Yeah, so we saw one of our customers who's a supermarket move to this more sort of federated setup a fair few years ago, actually during COVID, and they initially piloted it with the product team, and so the product team had access to a lot more data from all different departments, and they had the ability to kind of look at that data all and compare it against each other. What they noticed with that extra access was what looked to be a slight dip in sentiment around eggs. And because they had access to this data and they were able to interrogate it themselves, they were able to look into it and realize it wasn't a problem with eggs. It was a problem with the egg packaging, and customers were complaining that they'd moved from cardboard to plastic. And they were saying that they were disappointed with this because they saw this supermarket as a sustainable supermarket. It was one of the reasons they used them, etc., etc. And this is really interesting because the product team didn't actually know that this change had happened. They weren't aware that they'd switched to plastic packaging. They weren't part of that decision-making process, and the reason being was because it was in COVID times. Everyone was doing their online shopping, as I'm sure you can relate to, and Amazon had bought up all of the pulp for their cardboard boxes, and so there was a real limited supply of pulp, and so they had this ultimatum of either we don't sell eggs or we move to plastic packaging. And so there was nothing the product team could actually do about the packaging itself, but what they could do was rope in the comms team to push out communication to their customers as to why they've had to do this. Tell them that it's a short-term thing whilst they ride out the limited supply, and it enabled them to sort of get on top of what could have been a more significant kind of issue for them. And they were able to kind of get on top of that because they had real-time access to the data. So yeah, it kind of shows the benefits of moving to this more kind of federated approach, having access to more data to maybe spot things that otherwise you might not have done.
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, COVID times, that all of a sudden feels very far away, thankfully. Okay, so once you've kind of got the architecture right, once you're looking at the full gamut of customer conversations, and then once you've kind of brought that into a central area, and once you've kind of got that system set up so people can access it, I think the next thing that we want to talk about is what makes a good insight. First of all, what is an insight? You'll see this little thing at the top with the frowny face and the number. Vegan sausages taste like chalk. This is a universal truth of all vegan sausages. We know this statistically from working with multiple people that sell them. And it's exactly the kind of thing that you find in an insight. It's usually a snippet of text that sums up a lot of things that other people are talking about. There is a number associated with it, in this case, 496, which refers to a volume in a period, and then some kind of a sentiment score. If it's helpful, the sentiment score will be specifically around that fragment and not generally around people who are talking about this thing. And that is an insight. Very important to just be really clear about what we mean by an insight. And at Wordnerds, we take a fundamentalist approach to our insights. Not all insights are created equally. And we think there are three things that are non-negotiable when it comes to insights and generating useful ones. And they are depth, trust, and value. And over the next 10 minutes, we're going to unpack these three things and show you the difference, as an analyst, the difference between getting a good insight that you can do something with and flabby insights that you can't. So what do we mean by depth? Is it actually actionable? Can you do something with it? Both proactive and reactive. A lot of people are checking their customer data against a set of things they already know that they care about, a set of classification models. The biggest thing we see, where the biggest area we see AI being used, is in classification. And listening for stuff is not the same as listening. Listening is coming to a data set with an open mind and seeing what the data will bear and reacting to that. Whereas listening for stuff is applying what you already think to a data set. I mentioned before this idea that you being involved in this process. Fantastic to see Piers on this call. Nice to see you again. Piers once said to me, the piano does not play itself. I think that's a lovely phrase. Anybody who says to you that customer feedback analytics, insight creation is something that you can set up, that you can automate using AI so that you push a button and it just happens, is lying. It does not happen. It is an active pursuit. It's like a garden. It requires constant attention. It's never finished, and you need to be on top of it all of the time. I am sorry if that is an inconvenient truth, but it is a truth. And we'll go into reasons why in a moment. But assuming you can get a deep insight, the next thing to care about is, do people believe it? Is it trustworthy? Can you repeat it? We're working with a customer at the moment, and their head of customer experience, his stated goal is for 2 people in the organization to be able to go to their data lake with the same question and end up with the same result. It sounds really simple to do, but it's not always that simple. And I think it's a lovely ambition. And one of the problems that we see with generative AI in particular is, you can use something like ChatGPT to go in and tell you what your customers are saying about a specific item, but ask it 3 times and it will give you 3 different answers, and that's not helpful. As insights people, we need to know that our data is robust, and we need to be able to replicate the tests that we run and the things that we do. So can you repeat it? Is it accurate enough? We'll come on to what we mean by accurate enough as opposed to accurate. That's a very important distinction. And can you see inside the black box? We've spoken already about afterthought analytics that isn't really designed for understanding text. But there is also this kind of black box analytics where you're presented with a truth and you're just told to believe it without really understanding what has gone into creating that insight. And this is a particular problem with AI at the moment, and one of the things that, as organizations, we're sort of wrestling with particularly from a kind of governance and trust perspective. And then finally, when you've got stuff that is deep enough to do something useful with and that we believe that is robust, how do you know which ones to act on and which ones not to? Have you understood the context? Have you taken that into account? There are some things that you can see from the data are really important that you'd love to do stuff with, but you can't. And some things that are really easy to act on, but maybe aren't going to move the needle on these top level NPS CSAT figures. And how do you know the difference? And by starting to deal statistically with the different values of insights, you can start to turn customer feedback analytics into something that is lagging, into something that is more leading and predictive. And this is the holy grail. This is where we're all trying to get to. Instead of having our customer feedback analytics as being a look in a rear view mirror, how can we use this data to tell us what's coming down the road? Because when we can do that, it's much more valuable to our organizations. So we're going to go through each of these areas now and just unpack them in a bit more detail, starting with depth. And we're going to put this out there. When we talk about actionable insights, there's a lot of chat about this, and we get quite animated about this because everybody's talking about generating actionable insights. If you can go on to 15 different websites and people that do similar things to what we do, and they will all talk about stuff like this. We know, we've done it. These are the screenshots. It is a word that is bandied around left, right, and center. But actually, what does it mean? What does it mean to actually be actionable? Because a lot of the insights that these platforms deliver just simply aren't. They say that they do, and they don't. We will not insult you by telling you what is wrong with a word cloud. This is possibly the most insidious invention that that data people have ever come up with. But you'll be surprised the number of quite large platforms that still show word clouds and expect people to do something with them. But even this kind of thing, which is much more common, where, in this case, this is looking at drivers, areas to improve, areas to maintain, things that are going well, things that aren't going well. In this case, it's in the hospitality industry. It's looking at bedding, heating, maintenance, cleanliness, that kind of thing. This is a company that says that they are kind of, giving you actionable insight, knowing that air conditioning and heating is -2 this period across your presumably range of hotels. What can you actually do with that without understanding what's causing that, where it's taking place, the problems that people are having with it? Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Is this a maintenance issue? Is it that there isn't the right equipment there in the first place? There's a limit to what you can do with it. So our first tip on this is beware the claim of actionable insight and understand what it means to be actionable. And let's unpack that, why don't we? Because this kind of thing is not actionable. So one of the problems with AI is that in order for the way that AI works is you get a data scientist to train a classification model in advance to find something in a data set. So in this case, again, another popular software platform that's out there that's very good at some specific things. We're not poo-pooing other software platforms, they're great, but it's just not built for analyzing text data. And what they've done is they've trained a piece of AI to listen for things like late delivery, missed delivery window, wrong item, shipping mistake, all that kind of stuff. And it's telling us here that this is something that we need to act on. 11% of all responses are presumably delivery issues in this area. But as a person that deals with online shopping in this particular brand, what can you do with the information that that so many people have a problem with late delivery? Where is it happening? Why? What do you do about that? Similarly, these very abstract sentiment scores, 18%, 18 sentiment score in online orders, if they're not associated directly with fragments of issues, that's not a useful thing. And what happens as a insight person is you end up looking at that stuff to tell you when there's a problem. But in order to find out why there's a problem, the only way around it is to read the verbatim. You have to go in. And actually, if you look at this example that they've put on their website, please improve the card benefits by adding food and drink points or shopping points. COVID's changed the world we live in, and we can't take advantage of the amazing benefits this card has to offer. That's actually really useful. Knowing that adding food and drinks points and shopping points to your benefits card is something that they want, is something that you can give the product team. That's something that they can kind of change. But that's not being picked out in these emerging topics. Why not? Because it's too detailed. It's second, third, fourth, fifth level down. That's a specific thing that somebody thinks should be added to a card, which is a benefits thing, which is, an idea for improving our performance. And because of that, there are so many of those things that you could have to listen for. You just aren't going to be able to get data scientists to train classification models in advance to listen for all of the things that you could possibly have to listen for. So it doesn't happen. So you end up with these very top level categories that are quite generic. So AI classification effectively then isn't enough. AI is extremely useful. We use it all the time, but we use it in very specific ways and alongside other tools. So firstly, why isn't AI classification enough? Because it's not a set and forget upfront process. You can't ever understand upfront what all of your customers, all of the problems all of your customers are going to have and train AI for it. Just not going to happen. It's an iterative process. It's something that you have to be in all the time. We've mentioned it requires human input and also context and judgment. I think Steph's got some great examples of why that's important in a moment. And we mentioned before that it requires you to actually listen as well as listening for specific things. And the two methodologies we use to do both of these things are organic topics and 30-minute themes. Let me unpack those. So what is an organic topic? An organic topic is a topic from a data set that is just surfaced in your data without you having to do anything in advance. So here's an example. In this example, we've been on to Trustpilot. We've looked at what people have said in reviews about Starbucks. We've pulled all of that into the data set, and we literally press a button, come onto this page, and this is just what it shows us. It just shows us topics down the left-hand side. These ones happen to be ranked by volume, and some information on sentiment scores and some other stuff there. And so the first thing we do is we go, right, what are the topics that are driving negative sentiment? What are the things that are annoying customers? And if we rank by that, you can see on the left-hand side, there's lots of disgustings. Not surprising that the word disgusting is linked to the most negative sentiment scores, but it's disgusting service, it's disgusting coffee. Then you getting into things like place was filthy, toilets filthy, blah, blah, blah. So we're starting to see already some patterns here. I have no idea what problems Starbucks customers have. I don't really go to Starbucks, but because this stuff is being surfaced in the data by the system itself, we can start to see. If we click on, for example, place is filthy, we can then start looking at some of the verbatim. You can't sit down without moving to sit down. The place was filthy, floor, chairs, tables. Straight away then, we're seeing some things that we might want more information about, and we can start to think, right, tables being dirty is an issue, the store cleanliness is an issue. How do we find out more about that? So that's our organic topics. The system has surface stuff that we didn't know, unknown unknowns, surprises, new things in the data that we've never seen before. And the next thing we need to do is train that classification model to find all of the ways that people are talking about this, because people don't talk about things using predictable vocabulary. They talk about things in all kinds of mad ways. So for the example of this, I saw that stuff in the data and I popped into the thing an example of, the store was filthy, and what comes back then is this kind of thing here. So all tables not being wiped down, floor dirty, tables are left dirty so customers can't sit, blah, blah, blah. And what we try and do at Wordnerds is we let the person who is deciding on what's important and what isn't train the data set themselves. So all you would do to train this data set is, tick a button if you want it in your data set, cross it if you're not, because if what you're interested in is general cleanliness, some of this stuff, all of this stuff is in your data set. If you're specifically worried about your tables being cleaned regularly, actually that's a very different data set, and what you care about changes. It changes sometimes on an hourly basis. So it's really important that you're not just being presented with a theme that's a theme about being dirty and all the things that people are talking about dirtiness, but it's about that dirtiness specifically applied in different ways. And so we think that this is the best way of getting deep in the data. And it's the interplay of these two things. It's the ability to say, okay, what's in a data set that we didn't know about? Okay, this is interesting, these things. Let's train a piece of AI classification to find all of the people that are talking about that, put a number on it, and say, right, we've got 500 people talking about that, and then repeat the process. So within people talking about dirty things, what is it that's dirty? Okay, half of the people are saying the toilets are filthy. Half of the people are saying the tables are filthy. Right, let's train additional themes on each of those and look at maybe what then, using the topics, what then's driving those things. Oh, is it happening at a specific time of day? Is it more prevalent when the stores are busy? By using these things and by backing up the stuff we know we care about with the stuff that we didn't know that was in the data, it allows you to kind of go down that rabbit hole and follow the data through to a point that you can actually do something about. And that's the point I'm going to bring Steph back in, because I think, Steph, you've got another example from some supermarket customers of ours about how they found some really interesting, actionable insight using this methodology.
Yeah, so picking on the supermarkets with these examples, but it's a really good example of how depth is so important to getting a good insight and why it's definitely on our non-negotiable list. So the supermarket in question, they were looking at, they were trialing a bunch of different tools, and they were finding with these tools that they were able to, one, find there was a problem with delivery, and they were able to get some level of depth that let them know that this wasn't just a delivery problem per se, it was specifically a delivery problem with flowers. But that is where the other tools sort of stopped. So they were able to kind of follow the data so far, but a delivery problem with flowers is is definitely not actionable. There could be, you know, hundreds, thousands of reasons of what is actually causing this problem. When they used our tool, we were able to get these same two levels of data, so identify the delivery problem with flowers, but then they were able to use the organic topics that Pete's just described to surface of the people who were saying delivery and flowers, what else were they saying? And they were identifying specifically that it was the rose and peony bouquets that was where the area of low sentiment was really coming from. And so they were able to go away, train themes that would capture people talking specifically about rose and peony bouquets, and but also then use topics again to surface that actually with these bouquets in particular, the plastic that was wrapped around the flowers was being damaged, and water was leaking from it, causing damage to the cardboard box that the flowers were packaged in, and also causing damage to the flowers themselves. Petals were falling off and things like that. So and that is where you get kind of these, you know, your 5-6 layers deep into the data, and you're finding something that you can actually do something about. And that ability to be able to train themes on it, once you found them in topics, to then go away and train themes on it, allows you to track things over time, so that once you're trialing something to solve that plastic leaking, the water leaking problem, you can understand over time, is the sentiment changing? Are the volumes changing? Are people still complaining about this thing? So you can kind of measure it over time as well.
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, I love that, because again, you know, you're never going to get your data science team to train an AI theme in advance for soggy cardboard making flowers fall over and damaging the petals, you know, without some degree of iterative process that allows you to find these issues and drill down. That just isn't something that would occur to you in advance. So it's a really good example. All right, so you've got to your action level, but that's no good if you don't believe the data that you've got. And text analytics generally, and customer feedback in particular, in this industry, we have a guilty secret, and we're going to be totally upfront about it. And our guilty secret is that it is never, ever 100% accurate. Human beings are pretty mad. Language is incredibly diverse. It changes all the time. Young people use it very differently to older people. There are all kinds of wonderful regional variations that make one word in the northeast of England mean something completely different in the southwest. And don't even start me on teenagers and sarcasm and all of these other things that make understanding text such a minefield. And we're often sort of talking to customers, and we're kind of showing a data set where we've trained a classification model, and there's something in there, that just looks wrong, and it looks so wrong they immediately, oh my God, if that's got that so wrong, can we trust the rest of the data? And we get this all the time. When you get something like, so this is again some screenshots from some other software platforms. When you get something like this, you know, this is presented usually as graph like this. Okay, our most negatively mentioned themes this month are shipping and delivery or print quality or whatever it is. As soon as you start scratching into that data, actually, is that right? How's this been calculated? What's going on to make this to make the AI decide that is a print issue and not a different issue? What isn't covered? One of the problems with this is there's multiple ways you can be wrong about this. You can have something in the data set that is incorrectly classified and is in the data set that shouldn't be. And that's pretty easy to spot because you can read the data that's in the data set. But what you're missing from that is what else is in the data set that you've missed that should be in there. So you've got kind of, you know, false positives and false negatives. We talk about, I've mentioned the fact that this isn't like always accurate. It's not 100%, and it's never going to be. And anybody that tells you that is a liar. And that's fine. I think one of the things about dealing with customer feedback is making yourself comfortable with this idea that you don't have to be 100% accurate. You just have to be accurate enough. What do I mean by accurate enough? If you can train a theme to 70, 80, 90% accuracy, and that accuracy, provided you know what that level is, and provided that you know that how that's changing over time, as language changes, your themes change, are you comfortable with that amount of noise? Because at that level, you can still see the relative sizes of problems, all of which have a similar tolerance of noise in them, but you can see which ones are going up, which ones are going down, compared to themselves and compared to others, and they're still useful at that level. So don't worry about 100% accuracy, but you have to be sure that your themes are accurate enough. And one of the best ways to build trust in these things for everybody to feel that this stuff is robust is to know exactly where you are with that. And how do you know is a big problem. And I think, Steph, you're going to talk to everybody about how we're dealing with this problem and trying to make the accuracy problem a lot more robust.
Yeah, so yeah, the black box thing is really interesting, and definitely something that comes up a lot when we speak to voice of customer and CX teams. You know, we often see them, as Pete's just described, they're pushing through the results of a survey, or they're pushing in a big data set relating to complaints, and they get an output which says these are the top 5 sentiment, these are the top 5 insights in that data, or these are the top 5 most negative topics that have been talked about. But analysts being analysts, they want to make sure that what they're sending out to the rest of the business is right, and that they trust those results. And having this a tool where you can't actually see how it's done, it's working out, doesn't help with your trust. So we've made huge efforts to try and build something that is as transparent as possible. And there's a few things we've done. So the screen you look at, the interface, we try and make that as obvious as possible as to why those results have been generated, so you can see the workings out. As well as that, you can see on this screenshot, this is when users are able to train their own themes, which we've talked about. You can see the sentences themselves, and you can decide whether they are the types of sentence you want in the theme, or the types that you don't want in, and you can tick them if you do, and you can cross them if you don't. And so you're working with the classification model to train something that is specific to your definition of that theme. And I think all of our customers have very specific themes that have very specific definitions. And a good example of this is one of our customers who is a hardware store. They both sell toilets to customers, and they have customer toilets, so toilets in their store. And those are the sorts of nuances where, if you see low sentiment to do with toilets, actually what is the low sentiment about? Is it about the toilets you sell, or is it about the toilets in your store? And you being able to see the sentences, being able to see those different types of things that people are talking about, allows you to be really, really clear in your definition of what you're looking for, and equally clear as to what you're not looking for. So yeah, we kind of provide that information up front, so you can build something that is really specific to you. As well as that, we've got we present a health score, so that as you're training that theme up, you can see health, the overall health score of that theme. And Pete's already mentioned, you know, it's just not going to happen that you get to 100%. But if you're seeing sort of 70, 80, 90% health, you know that is trustworthy, and you can go and use that. And if it's coming up in your results, it's something that you can rely on. Whereas if you're seeing something that's, you know, 20, 30, 40%, and that's coming up in your results, you know that might not be something you want to actually kind of use as an insight, you might want to go back and train that theme further before you rely on it as something to push out to the rest of the organization. So yeah, those are the sorts of things that we try and do to improve the transparency of what's happening, and really get our users understanding like how accurate all of the data is, and how accurate the data analysis is.
Thanks, Steph. And it hasn't escaped my attention that you used that as an excuse to toilet bomb a slide. So thank you very much for throwing that particular grenade in. Appreciate it. Okay, we're nearly there. There's one more thing we want to talk about, and that is the last of our 3 pillars, the last of our non-negotiables, and that is around understanding the value of an insight. And this idea that all insights aren't created equal. So you've set up your data correctly. You're using the full breadth of customer conversations. You are you've got that information. You're processing it against a clear methodology. You're exploring it. You're actually listening. You're seeing what's in the data. You're reacting to that. You're finding things that could be driving NPS. You've got your NPS score going up or down. You've got different drivers, sentiment scores and volumes going up or down, and you're starting to, in your mind, create this kind of picture of, okay, this could be driving that, this could be driving that, this might not be, but actually that list's probably quite long. If you're a supermarket, if you're a large organization, you could have tens or hundreds of thousands of those problems. And how do you work out which ones are the ones that actually have a statistical correlation with the score that you're being judged on, your KPI, whatever that is, NPS, CSAT, whatever? What's the stuff that's actually driving that? Or are you just guessing? Are you saying, well, this is going up and NPS has gone up, so that's a positive thing? Or sentiment's gone down at that and NPS has gone down, so maybe that's driving that? So now what? So what? You've got this insight, because one of the things that that we see a lot is people talk about being insight rich or data rich and insight poor and all of that kind of stuff. But insight is only as good as the action that you take. And actually, how confident are you when you've done all of this work and you found potentially thousands of insights? Just because something is large volumes in the data doesn't mean it's driving NPS. Often the things that drive NPS are the things that are lower in volume, but for the segment of customers that it affects, actually it affects them really profoundly, and it means that they can't use a product or a service, and that drives CSAT and NPS much more than the obvious stuff in the data. So how do you find that out? I think there's ways of doing this in terms of what we call frameworks, so just ways of organizing the data that make some of this stuff easier to understand and surfaces things at different levels. What kind of things do we mean by framework? So NPS is obviously a framework, and understanding what detractors are saying compared to promoters and things like that. So being able to segment your different feedback like that is useful. But also things like the user journey analysis. So being able to put things out chronologically and look at, okay, this is interesting. We've not got a problem with people, I don't know, ordering tickets for shows. We've not got a problem with people turning up to the theaters, but actually when they get there, they can't hear. Laying things out chronologically will surface different things. So there's an element to how the data is organized. And one of the things that our product team is working on at the minute is ways of using useful frameworks as overlays to this data and applying that in real time to surface some of this stuff. But again, the best customer experience teams, the best insights analysts, and some of the more mature voice of customer programs that we're working with are using linear regression as a really simple statistical tool to actually draw lines between all of the different drivers that you're identifying, and which ones of those are actually affecting the KPI, the numeric KPI that Scott introduced right at the start. What is linear regression? I know there will be some people on this call that are laughing now because they've been doing linear regression since they were 3. And there will be other people on this call that don't have a statistics background, that don't, that have heard the word linear regression, they don't know what it means. We're going to follow this webinar up with some deeper content on linear regression, because it just is something that we're seeing more and more at the moment. But effectively, a linear regression is just a statistical methodology that allows you to look at two different variables, a dependent variable, independent variable, and decide, is this thing moving that thing? Is there a positive or negative correlation? As that goes up, as more people start complaining about vegan sausages tasting like chalk, does that increase, decrease, or do nothing to our NPS and CSAT? And it's a really easy thing to do, and it's something that we're seeing more and more. So if you haven't yet got on the linear regression train, look into it, speak to us about it. It's something that we can talk to you about and help you work out. And it's something that we're seeing a lot more, particularly in people who are wanting to use data more predictively. And I think the last thing that we're going to talk about, I think, Steph, I think you're going to talk about, again, more toilet related stories from the front line here. I don't know why we seem to be obsessed with toilets today, but supermarkets and toilets, that's what you've learned about today.
Yeah, what a webinar. Yeah, so one of our B2B customers was doing exactly what Pete just described, in terms of looking at one of their core KPIs. In this instance, it was churn numbers, rather than strictly NPS. But they'd noticed an increase in churn numbers, and they used that framework approach that you can do through the platform to identify, follow the depth, to work out specific topics of conversation that their customers were having, leading up to them churning. And they identified a number of those, say 10 different topics of conversation that were being mentioned often, that were leading to that customer churning. They then did some regression analysis on this to help provide some statistical significance to that data, and were able to refine that 10 to a lower number, like 5. And so they were able to really prioritize these 5 topics of conversation, and have them as more of a leading indicator to addressing customers that were going to churn. So they started to put in triggered closed loop actions around customers who were mentioning these 5 topics of conversation. And that action was give them a call and basically try and get their satisfaction up. And in doing that, they were able to create themes and track changes over time in the platform to work out whether that action of triggering a closed loop action was actually having an effect on churn rates. It did end up being successful, so they were able to reduce the churn rates by applying kind of additional closed loop actions. And so that then turned it into a predictive piece of data. And so they were able to use these 5 topics of conversation and as predictive, almost predictive analytics, to say, like, okay, these customers are really likely to churn. We need to go and speak to them. And the thing that's really interesting with this particular example is in voice of customer and CX, what tends to happen is these closed loop actions are focused to quant. So they tend to be around more transactional things, where people have, in a survey have asked how you enjoyed your service or delivery or whatever. And if they've scored under, say, 4, that would usually trigger this action. What this company were able to do was continue with the quant actions, but also add topics of conversation to also trigger like closed loop actions. So they were able to kind of bring more data into the mix. And the great thing is it did have a successful result. So they were able to reduce churn with it.
Thanks, Steph. Okay, so we've got just under 10 minutes left. Again, this is a really complicated, deep topic. We could spend hours going into the minutiae of it. But what we've tried to do today is to start with founding principles, setting up your overall voice of customer thing, and show you, what you should be aiming at broadly for that. But also, once you're looking at all of the data, how you go from having a number that you're being judged on to actually drilling down into the data to see what things are affecting that. And the example that Steph picked up on, the people doing this are actually running a very sophisticated voice of customer program. And not everybody is at the stage where they can use regression analysis and do things predictively and create predictive churn models. But I think most people we're dealing with are on a journey towards that. And I think over the next few years, one of the things that we're going to see as people get more actionable data and are able to easier, as AI gets better, and as we're able to get to that, those insights that are valuable, that are robust, and that people kind of trust and that people understand. I think we're going to see more and more instances of people being able to actually see which ones of those are driving things and which ones aren't, so that you know where to focus your action. And that's it from us for now. I think, Scott, you're going to introduce the Q&A, if that's getting this right.
Yeah, but it would be remiss of me as a marketer not to advertise our next event, which is in the 2nd of May, and it's our Customer Experience Summit. This is a real special event where we are getting together 6 of the best in customer experience to share the big bets that they're making in this financial year. So the first 3 guests that we got confirmed are Vinay Parmer, Rebecca Brown, and Ed Deason. 2 of which are in the top 50 CX influencers this year. Vinay has been working for National Express, Drew the Star, and Rebecca, RICS. And then Ed Deason as well from Wiggle and Pret, who will be sharing exactly what they are working on this year and where they're placing their bets. We'll announce the next 3 in due course, and we'll send an invite to you after this webinar with the slides and recordings. And to finish from us on the next slide, if you were interested in AI and how it can support you, please get in touch. You can book a demo and the discovery call with us, where we'll share anything you'd like. You can bounce questions off us as to what works, what doesn't work in this space. We're very upfront. So you can head to the website wordnerds.ai and book a demo with the lovely Helen Presh. But yeah, that's it for today. If you get any questions, please drop them in the chat now, and we will do our very best to answer them. There was one that actually came up that we can maybe get rolling with that I had actually. Are there any organizational strategies that you've seen work well when a company adopts AI for the first time, or a tool like this? What's worked well to really bed it in and get value from it as quickly as possible?
I'll jump in on this one if that's okay. So I think going back to the earlier slides when we talked about setup, moving from that that siloed data approach to a federated approach isn't an overnight thing, and you need buy-in from lots of different people in lots of different departments. And so I think what we see is piloting it with one department tends to work quite well. You can build trust in the process, and also almost case studies that you can share around, and to try and get kind of interest in it. So yeah, that tends to work quite well and is a far easier approach than just going all out for this to kind of happen with everyone all at once.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, I think AI is in a particularly interesting place at the minute. I think it's where blockchain was a couple of years ago, where I don't know what the question is, but blockchain is the answer. And it definitely feels like AI is there at the moment, where everybody knows they should be doing more with AI. Everybody's madly looking around for applications of AI. But actually, as we've discussed today, AI is really good at very specific things, but it's very not good at lots of other things as well. And it's got certain limitations. And I think to your point about what works well with AI is really understanding the bits where AI can help you and exactly how it can help you. This idea that it is an enhancement for the people that have the business context and the knowledge to work out what is interesting, what isn't, what is in our data set, what's our nuance, what do we care about, and using it for the things that it's really good at, and knowing what it's not good at, and using other methodologies for that as well. We use a lot of corpus linguistics, a lot of behavioral science, a lot of other disciplines, a lot of statistics, a lot of other disciplines that aren't AI, and that's good as well. Corpus linguistics has been around for hundreds of years. There's a reason for that. It's really useful for some things. AI will probably eat it in due course, but not everything has to be AI.